The morning sun painted the Iraqi desert in shades of gold and amber as Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison adjusted his tactical vest one final time. The fabric was already damp with sweat despite the early hour, and he knew the day would only get hotter. Around him, the rest of SEAL Team Alpha performed their final equipment checks with a methodical precision that had kept them alive through dozens of missions in this unforgiving landscape. Morrison had been leading special operations teams for 8 years, but something felt different about this mission. Maybe it was the intelligence report that seemed too clean, too perfect. Or perhaps it was the way his commanding officer had avoided eye contact during the briefing. Whatever it was, the feeling sat in his gut like a cold stone, refusing to be dismissed by logic or training. The mission itself appeared straightforward enough. Intelligence had located a high-value target in a compound approximately 40 kilometers northeast of their current position. The target was allegedly a bomb maker responsible for several devastating attacks on coalition forces over the past 6 months. The plan called for a swift insertion, neutralization of the target, and extraction before enemy reinforcements could arrive. Petty Officer First Class Marcus Chun finished checking his communications equipment and looked up at Morrison. Chun had been part of Alpha Team for 3 years, and Morrison had learned to trust the young technician's instincts almost as much as his own. The slight frown on Chen's face suggested he was picking up the same uneasy vibrations that had been bothering Morrison all morning. "Comms are green across the board, sir," Chen reported, but his tone carried an unspoken question. "Something on your mind, Chun?" Morrison asked, knowing that encouraging his team to voice concerns had saved their lives more than once. Chun hesitated for a moment, then spoke carefully. "The intel package, sir. It came through channels I've never seen before. The encryption signatures don't match anything in our standard databases." Morrison felt the cold stone in his gut grow heavier. "Could it be a new protocol we haven't been briefed on?" "Possible, sir, but unlikely. I've got clearance for most of the new systems, and this doesn't match any of them." Chen lowered his voice. "Sir, what if this is a setup?" The question hung in the air between them, like smoke from a distant fire. Morrison had been thinking the same thing, but hadn't wanted to voice it without concrete evidence. In their line of work, paranoia could be just as deadly as overconfidence, but ignoring gut feelings had gotten good men killed. Before Morrison could respond, Petty Officer Second Class David Kim approached with his sniper rifle slung across his shoulder. Kim was the team's designated marksman, a soft-spoken man from California who could place a bullet within a 2-inch circle at 800 meters. His presence always brought a sense of security to the team, knowing that Kim was watching their backs through his scope. "Sir, I've been studying the terrain maps," Kim said, unfolding a detailed topographical chart. "The approach route takes us through some pretty open country. Lots of elevated positions that could provide overwatch for anyone wanting to set up an ambush." Morrison studied the map, noting the scattered hills and ridgelines that dotted their path. "What's your recommendation?" "I like to take point with Rodriguez and clear those positions before the main element moves through. It'll slow us down, but better safe than sorry." Staff Sergeant Luis Rodriguez nodded his agreement. The demolitions expert had survived more firefights than anyone else on the team, and his tactical instincts were razor sharp. "Kim's right, sir. This whole area screams ambush to me. Too many good hiding spots, too few escape routes for us." Morrison found himself facing a decision that would haunt him for years to come. Every instinct he had developed over 8 years of combat operations was telling him to abort the mission and return to base. The intelligence was questionable, the terrain was unfavorable, and his entire team was expressing concerns. But his orders had come directly from the Pentagon, marked with the highest priority classifications he had ever seen. The target they were hunting, according to the classified files, possessed technical knowledge that could revolutionize improvised explosive devices. If he escaped, thousands of coalition troops could die in increasingly sophisticated attacks. Morrison weighed his team's safety against the potential catastrophe of letting this target slip away. "We proceed as planned," Morrison finally decided. But we modify the approach. Kim, you and Rodriguez will indeed take point and clear those overwatch positions. Chun, I want continuous communication with base. Any sign of trouble, and we extract immediately. The team loaded into their vehicles with practiced efficiency. Morrison rode in the lead MRAP with Chun and two other team members, while Kim and Rodriguez took the trail vehicle with the remaining operators. The armored vehicles were designed to withstand most improvised explosive devices, but Morrison knew that determined enemies always found ways to adapt their tactics. As they pulled away from the forward operating base, Morrison caught sight of the intelligence officer who had briefed them the night before. The man was standing near the communications tent, speaking rapidly into a satellite phone. Something about his body language struck Morrison as odd, but the vehicles were already moving, and there was no time to investigate further. The desert landscape rolled past their windows in an endless parade of sand and rock. Occasionally, they would pass the ruins of ancient settlements, their crumbling walls serving as reminders of how many civilizations had tried to tame this harsh environment. Morrison found himself wondering if future archaeologists would someday excavate the remains of their own military bases with the same detached curiosity. Chen's voice crackled through the intercom system. "Sir, I'm picking up some unusual radio traffic. Encrypted, but not using any coalition frequencies I recognize. Distance and direction?" Morrison asked, feeling the familiar spike of adrenaline that preceded combat. "Hard to tell, sir. The signals are faint and intermittent. Could be atmospheric interference, but the patterns seem too regular for natural phenomena." Morrison keyed his radio to contact the trail vehicle. "Overwatch, this is Alpha Leader. Are you picking up any unusual communications traffic?" Kim's voice came back immediately. "Negative, Alpha Leader. But Rodriguez has identified 3 potential sniper positions along our route. We're going to need to stop and clear them properly." The decision to halt the convoy and investigate the suspicious positions probably saved Morrison's life, though he wouldn't realize it until much later. As their vehicles pulled to a stop behind a low ridge, a sniper nearly 2 miles away adjusted his aim slightly and waited for them to resume their predictable course. The sniper's name was Hassan al-Rashid, and he had been hunting American Special Operations teams for over 2 years. Unlike the usual insurgent fighters, al-Rashid was a former military officer who had received advanced training from several international sources. His rifle was a custom-built weapon capable of accurately engaging targets at distances that most soldiers could barely comprehend. Al-Rashid had been tracking Alpha Team since they left their base, using a network of spotters and communication intercepts to predict their route. The intelligence that had drawn them into the desert had indeed been fabricated, but not by enemy forces. Instead, it had been created by a mole within the American intelligence community, someone who had been feeding information to al-Rashid for months. As Kim and Rodriguez began their careful advance toward the first suspected sniper position, al-Rashid made final adjustments to his scope and settled in to wait. He had chosen his position with extraordinary care, burying himself in a dune that provided perfect concealment while offering clear fields of fire across the entire area where the Americans would have to pass. The distance between al-Rashid and the American vehicles was just over 1,800 meters, well within his capability, but challenging enough to require perfect conditions. He had been monitoring weather reports for days, waiting for the specific combination of temperature, humidity, and wind that would allow for a guaranteed first-round hit. Morrison watched through binoculars as Kim and Rodriguez approached the first hilltop. The two SEALs moved with the fluid grace of predators, using every available piece of cover to mask their approach. Morrison had seen them perform this same tactical dance dozens of times, and their competence never failed to impress him. "Alpha Leader, this is Overwatch," Kim's voice whispered through the radio. "First position is clear, but we found evidence of recent activity. Cigarette butts and food wrappers maybe 12 hours old. The confirmation that enemies had been watching their route sent another chill through Morrison's system. Someone had definitely been preparing for their arrival, which meant the mission was almost certainly a trap. But if they turned back now, without concrete proof of enemy activity, Morrison knew he would face difficult questions from his superiors. "Continue to the second position," Morrison ordered. "But stay alert. We may be walking into something bigger than anticipated." As Kim and Rodriguez moved toward the second hilltop, Chun suddenly straightened in his seat. "Sir, I'm getting multiple radio signatures now. Definitely encrypted, definitely coordinated. Someone's running an operation out here." Morrison grabbed his own radio and called back to their forward operating base. "Base, this is Alpha Leader requesting immediate intelligence update on our target area. We're detecting organized enemy communications." The response came back after a long delay. "Alpha Leader, no additional intelligence available. Continue mission as briefed." The dismissive response confirmed Morrison's worst fears. Either their intelligence network had completely failed to detect a significant enemy presence, or someone was deliberately sending them into danger. Neither possibility offered much comfort as they sat exposed in the middle of the desert. Al-Rashid watched the American vehicles through his scope, noting how they had stopped behind the ridge. His spotters had reported the two Americans advancing to clear the observation posts, exactly as he had predicted they would. American Special Operations Forces were highly trained, but they were also predictable in their tactical procedures. The sniper made a final check of his range card, confirming the exact distance to several predetermined target areas. When the Americans resumed their movement, they would have to pass through at least one of these zones, giving him multiple opportunities for the perfect shot. What Al-Rashid didn't know was that his own communications were being monitored by a different American intelligence unit, one that had been tracking his activities for weeks. Unfortunately, this information had not been shared with Morrison's team due to compartmentalized security protocols that often left field units operating without critical intelligence. The stage was set for a confrontation that would test everything the SEALs had learned about desert warfare, while demonstrating just how deadly a single skilled enemy could be when given the advantages of preparation and concealment. Morrison stared out at the seemingly empty landscape, unaware that death was already taking aim. Hassan al-Rashid had learned patience during his years as a child in the mountains of Afghanistan, where his grandfather taught him to hunt ibex with an ancient rifle that required perfect shot placement to bring down the agile mountain goats. Those lessons, learned under the harsh instruction of a man who had fought the Soviets for a decade, had shaped al-Rashid into something far more dangerous than a typical insurgent fighter. Now, buried beneath carefully arranged sand and camouflage in a dune that he had prepared over the course of 3 days, al-Rashid embodied those childhood lessons. His breathing was slow and controlled, his heart rate deliberately lowered through techniques that most Western snipers never learned. The rifle beside him was a masterpiece of engineering, assembled from components acquired through a network that spanned 3 continents. The weapon itself told a story of modern warfare's complexity. The barrel had been manufactured in Germany for civilian sporting purposes, then diverted through black market channels in Turkey. The scope was Russian military hardware, supposedly destroyed after the Soviet collapse, but actually sold to private dealers who asked no questions about their customers. The custom stock had been crafted by a former Marine Corps armorer who had turned to profitable illegal work after his discharge. Al-Rashid had been watching the American Special Operations Team since before dawn, using night vision equipment to track their departure from the forward operating base. His network of spotters had provided regular updates on their route and speed, allowing him to predict their arrival time within a few minutes. Everything had proceeded exactly according to his carefully developed plan. The sniper's position was a marvel of military engineering and desert survival skills. He had dug into the dune at an angle that provided structural stability while remaining completely invisible from ground level. Specially designed breathing tubes allowed him to remain buried for hours without detection, while a small periscope system gave him a panoramic view of the surrounding terrain. Most importantly, Al-Rashid had studied American tactical procedures with the dedication of a scholar. He possessed training manuals, after-action reports, and detailed analyses of SEAL team operations acquired through his handler in Damascus. He knew how they would approach suspected sniper positions, how they would communicate, and, most critically, where they would be most vulnerable during their standard clearing procedures. The two Americans advancing on foot toward the observation posts were moving exactly as Al-Rashid had predicted they would. The sniper tracked them through his scope, noting their spacing, their use of cover, and their communication patterns. They were skilled operators, but their movements followed doctrine that Al-Rashid had memorized months ago. Through his earpiece, Al-Rashid received updates from 3 spotters positioned at strategic locations around the area. Each spotter had been recruited carefully, chosen for their local knowledge and their motivation to fight the American occupation. They communicated using a code system based on traditional Arabic poetry, making their transmissions nearly impossible for American intelligence to decipher, even if intercepted. The Eagles approached the first mountain, whispered one spotter, indicating that the American foot team was nearing the first observation post. Al-Rashid acknowledged the transmission with a single click of his radio transmitter, maintaining complete voice silence that had kept him undetected for over 2 years of operations. He had learned that American electronic warfare capabilities were formidable, but they struggled to locate threats that never transmitted verbal communications. The sniper's preparation for this specific engagement had begun 6 weeks earlier when his handler informed him that American intelligence was developing information about a high-value target in this area. Al-Rashid suspected that the intelligence was fabricated specifically to draw out American special operations teams, but he didn't question his orders. His job was to eliminate high-value American targets, and SEAL teams represented the highest value targets available. Al-Rashid adjusted his position slightly, ensuring that his rifle remained perfectly aligned with his primary target zone. The movement was imperceptible, executed with the slow precision of someone who understood that a single careless motion could mean the difference between success and death. He had seen too many snipers betray their positions through impatience or poor concealment discipline. The custom rifle beside him represented years of careful acquisition and modification. The barrel had been precisely machined to accept specialized ammunition that Al-Rashid manufactured himself using components acquired through his extensive network. Each bullet was hand-loaded to exact specifications, creating ammunition that exceeded the performance of most military-issue rounds. Al-Rashid's scope was calibrated for the specific atmospheric conditions of the Iraqi desert, compensating for the heat distortions and air density variations that could throw off long-range shots. He had spent countless hours studying ballistics tables and atmospheric data, turning himself into a human computer capable of making split-second calculations that most snipers required electronic assistance to perform. The sniper's patience was legendary among the insurgent networks that operated in western Iraq. Stories were told of Al-Rashid waiting motionless for 18 hours to take a single shot, or of him remaining in position for 3 days until the perfect target presented itself. These stories, while sometimes exaggerated, reflected a fundamental truth about his operational methodology. Through his scope, Al-Rashid watched the American vehicles halt behind the ridgeline. He had anticipated this pause, knowing that competent special operations teams would stop to assess suspected sniper positions rather than blindly continuing through dangerous terrain. The Americans were following their training exactly as he had hoped they would. The Eagles rest behind the stone wall, reported another spotter, confirming the location of the main American force. Al-Rashid clicked his acknowledgement and began his final preparation sequence. He checked his range card one more time, verifying the distances to several predetermined shooting positions. The wind was nearly perfect, blowing at a steady 4 knots from the southwest. The temperature was beginning to climb as the morning progressed, but the heat distortions hadn't yet become severe enough to affect long-range accuracy. The sniper's breathing technique was based on methods learned from a former Soviet Spetsnaz instructor who had trained him during a winter in the Caucasus Mountains. The Russian had been old school, teaching techniques that predated modern technology and relied purely on human skill and endurance. Those lessons had served al-Rashid well in environments where electronic assistance was unavailable or unreliable. Al-Rashid's network had provided him with detailed intelligence about the American team they were hunting. He knew the names and backgrounds of several team members, their typical tactical procedures, and, most importantly, their previous mission patterns. This information had been gathered over months of surveillance and analysis, creating a comprehensive picture that allowed him to predict their behavior with remarkable accuracy. The target folder al-Rashid carried contained photographs of each American team member, along with detailed notes about their individual roles and capabilities. He had studied these files until he could identify each man from hundreds of meters away, turning the impersonal nature of long-range sniping into something much more intimate and deadly. Lieutenant Commander Morrison was identified as the primary target, both for his leadership role and for the psychological impact his elimination would have on the remaining team members. Al-Rashid had read Morrison's service record, obtained through sources within the Iraqi government who had access to captured American personnel files. The man was experienced and competent, which made him particularly dangerous to al-Rashid's continued operations. The sniper checked his watch, noting that the Americans had been stationary for nearly 15 minutes. His experience suggested that they would resume movement soon, as American Special Operations doctrine emphasized speed and momentum over extended reconnaissance. The longer they remained in one position, the more vulnerable they became to indirect fire attacks and enemy reinforcement. Al-Rashid's spotters continued providing regular updates on American positions and movements. The coordination between the sniper and his observers was seamless, the result of months of training and operational experience. Each spotter knew exactly what information al-Rashid needed, and when he needed it, eliminating unnecessary radio traffic that might be detected by American electronic surveillance. The sniper's camouflage had been perfected through trial and error over dozens of previous operations. His clothing was treated with special chemicals that reduced his infrared signature, making him nearly invisible to American thermal imaging equipment. The sand and vegetation covering his position had been carefully selected and arranged to match the surrounding terrain exactly. Al-Rashid had learned to think like his targets, understanding how American troops viewed the battlefield and what they looked for when scanning for threats. This psychological insight was often more valuable than technical skill, allowing him to remain hidden in plain sight while less sophisticated snipers were quickly detected and eliminated. The rifle's trigger had been modified to provide exactly the right amount of resistance and travel distance for al-Rashid's preferences. He had worked with the same gunsmith for 3 years, gradually refining the weapon until it felt like a natural extension of his body. The sight picture through his scope was crystal clear, with range markings that he had memorized until he could judge distances automatically. "The eagles prepare to fly," whispered his primary spotter, indicating that the Americans were showing signs of preparing to resume movement. Al-Rashid acknowledged the report and settled into his final shooting position. His rifle was already precisely aimed at the most likely route the American vehicles would take when they resumed their advance. The sniper's body was completely relaxed, his muscles loose, and ready to execute the shot sequence he had practiced thousands of times. The moment that would change everything for both al-Rashid and the American SEAL team was now less than 10 minutes away. The sniper had prepared for this engagement with meticulous care, but he couldn't have anticipated how the Americans would react to his attack or how their response would ultimately lead to his own downfall. Al-Rashid took one final look through his scope, checking the wind flags he had positioned at various distances to monitor air currents. Everything was perfect. The conditions were ideal, his position was secure, and his targets were about to move into his kill zone. He had never failed to hit a target under similar circumstances, and he had no reason to believe this engagement would be any different. The crack of al-Rashid's rifle split the desert silence like thunder in a clear sky, the sound echoing off distant ridges and rolling across the sand in waves that seemed to go on forever. Lieutenant Commander Morrison felt the bullet pass within inches of his head, the displacement of air creating a distinct whisper that every combat veteran learns to recognize and fear. Morrison's training kicked in before his conscious mind could process what had happened. He was already diving toward the nearest cover, his body moving with the automatic responses drilled into him through years of combat experience. Around him, the other members of Alpha Team were reacting with similar speed, each man seeking protection while simultaneously trying to locate the source of the incoming fire. "Sniper! Sniper! Take cover!" Morrison shouted into his radio, though his team was already moving before his warning reached them. The bullet had missed him by less than 6 inches, and he could feel the residual heat from its passage still warming the air near his face. Petty Officer Kim's voice crackled through the communications system from his position near the first observation post. "I heard the shot, but I can't identify the source. Sound is echoing too much to get a bearing." Morrison pressed himself against the armored side of their MRAP vehicle, his mind racing through the tactical implications of their situation. A sniper accurate enough to nearly hit him at what appeared to be extreme range represented a threat level that his team had rarely encountered. Most insurgent snipers were poorly trained and equipped, capable of harassment, but not precision elimination of specific targets. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez's voice joined the radio chatter from his position with Kim. "Sir, that shot came from at least 1,000 meters out, maybe more. This isn't some farmer with an old hunting rifle. We're dealing with a professional." The assessment sent a chill through Morrison's system that had nothing to do with the desert wind. Professional snipers were rare in the insurgency, but when they appeared, they changed the entire dynamic of an engagement. A skilled sniper with proper equipment could pin down an entire unit for hours, picking off targets at will while remaining virtually undetectable. Chin was already working his electronic surveillance equipment, trying to detect any communication signatures that might reveal the sniper's position or support network. "Sir, I'm picking up multiple encrypted transmissions. Short bursts, probably coordinate updates. This guy has spotters." The confirmation that they were facing an organized sniper team rather than a lone shooter made their situation significantly more dangerous. Spotters could provide the sniper with real-time intelligence about American movements, while helping him adjust his fire for maximum effectiveness. Morrison had faced similar situations in Afghanistan, and he knew how quickly they could deteriorate into prolonged sieges. Al-Rashid was already adjusting his position in response to the missed shot, though his movement was so subtle that even trained observers would have difficulty detecting it. The miss had been caused by a momentary wind shift that he hadn't anticipated, a reminder that even perfect preparation couldn't eliminate all variables in long-range shooting. Through his scope, the sniper could see the Americans taking cover behind their vehicles, their movements revealing their level of training and experience. These are not ordinary soldiers, but elite operators who understood the threat they faced and knew how to respond appropriately. Al-Rashid felt a familiar thrill of anticipation as he prepared for what promised to be a challenging engagement. The sniper spotters were already providing updated position reports on the American team, allowing Al-Rashid to track their movements even when they thought they were concealed. The coordination between the sniper and his observers was seamless, the result of months of training and operational experience working together. "Eagle Leader seeks shelter behind the metal bird," reported one spotter, indicating that Morrison had taken cover behind the MRAP vehicle. Al-Rashid acknowledged the transmission and began calculating his next shot. The American commander had proven alert and quick to react, which made him an even more valuable target. Eliminating the leader would disrupt the team's coordination and potentially force them into tactical errors that would create additional opportunities. Morrison was studying the terrain through his binoculars, trying to identify likely sniper positions within the range indicated by Rodriguez's assessment. The desert landscape offered dozens of potential hiding spots, from rock outcroppings to sand, dunes to abandoned structures scattered across the area. Finding one sniper among all those possibilities would require systematic searching that could take hours. Kim, Rodriguez, what's your status on those observation posts? Morrison called through his radio. First position was clear, sir. We're approaching the second one now, but we need to be careful. That sniper probably has overwatch on our movement. Morrison understood the dilemma his forward team faced. They needed to clear the suspected positions to ensure the main element security, but movement in the open made them vulnerable to the sniper's fire. It was exactly the kind of tactical problem that professional snipers specialized in creating. The sound of a second shot rang across the desert, this one impacting the ground just meters from Kim's position. The SEAL threw himself behind a boulder, his heart hammering as he realized how close the bullet had come to ending his life. The accuracy was frightening, suggesting that the sniper could engage targets at will across a wide area. Contact! Contact! I'm pinned down at the second observation post, Kim reported, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his system. Al-Rashid smiled grimly as he watched the American sniper dive for cover. The shot had been deliberately placed to pin the man down rather than kill him, part of a larger tactical plan to separate and isolate the American team. Dead enemies couldn't make mistakes, but frightened and isolated enemies often did. Morrison realized that his team was being systematically manipulated by an opponent who understood their tactics and capabilities. The sniper was using precision fire to control their movement, forcing them into positions where they would be more vulnerable to subsequent attacks. It was a sophisticated approach that suggested military training and extensive experience. All units, maintain current positions, Morrison ordered. Do not attempt movement until we locate this sniper. Chun, give me a priority link to base. We need immediate air support. The call for air support reflected the severity of their situation. SEAL teams rarely requested external assistance unless they faced threats beyond their normal capabilities. Morrison knew that calling for help would raise questions about his team's competence, but those questions were preferable to losing his men to a sniper they couldn't locate. Chin's response was not what Morrison wanted to hear. Sir, base is reporting that air support is unavailable due to other priority missions. We're on our own for at least 2 hours. The news that they would receive no immediate assistance confirmed Morrison's growing suspicion that this entire mission had been designed to isolate his team in a vulnerable position. Someone wanted Alpha Team eliminated, and they were willing to sacrifice American lives to achieve that goal. Al-Rashid was monitoring American radio communications through equipment provided by his handlers, allowing him to follow their tactical discussions and anticipate their next moves. The intelligence that the Americans would receive no air support for 2 hours had been specifically arranged by his network, ensuring that the engagement would be decided by skill and preparation rather than overwhelming firepower. The sniper began his preparation for what he intended to be the decisive shot of the engagement. Morrison remained his primary target, both for tactical and psychological reasons. Eliminating the American commander would create confusion and potentially cause the remaining team members to make fatal mistakes. Through his scope, Al-Rashid could see Morrison's position behind the MRAP vehicle. The American was partially concealed, but enough of his silhouette was visible to provide a viable target. The range was just over 1,600 meters, well within Al-Rashid's capabilities under current conditions. The wind had shifted slightly since his first shot, requiring minor adjustments to his point of aim. Al-Rashid consulted his range card and made the necessary corrections, his movements precise and deliberate. He had only one more opportunity to achieve surprise before the Americans would begin taking countermeasures that would make his job significantly more difficult. Morrison felt the weight of command pressing down on him as he considered his limited options. His team was pinned down by a sniper they couldn't locate, air support was unavailable, and their mission had clearly been compromised. Every instinct told him to extract immediately, but his order specifically prohibited mission abandonment without direct authorization from higher command. The lieutenant commander made a decision that would save his life and cost al-Rashid his advantage. Instead of remaining stationary behind the vehicle, Morrison began moving in an unpredictable pattern, never staying in one position long enough for a sniper to acquire a stable target picture. Al-Rashid had been tracking Morrison's position for nearly 30 seconds, waiting for the perfect moment to take a shot. When the American commander suddenly began moving erratically, the sniper found himself without a clear target for the first time in the engagement. The tactical situation was beginning to shift in favor of the Americans. The third shot of the engagement never came. Instead, al-Rashid found himself facing an enemy who refused to cooperate with his tactical plan, an enemy who understood that survival depended on disrupting the sniper's ability to predict and control their movements. The desert duel was about to enter a new and more dangerous phase. Morrison's radio crackled with an unexpected transmission from Kim. "Sir, I think I've got something. There's a dune about 1,800 meters northwest that doesn't look quite right. The vegetation pattern is wrong for natural growth." For the first time since the engagement began, Morrison felt a spark of hope. His team's training and experience were beginning to level the tactical playing field against their hidden enemy. Kim's observation about the suspicious dune triggered a fundamental shift in the tactical dynamics of the engagement. For the first time since al-Rashid had opened fire, the Americans had a potential location for their tormentor. Morrison felt his pulse quicken as he realized they might finally have an opportunity to turn from prey into predators. "Kim, maintain overwatch on that position," Morrison ordered through his radio. "Do not engage until we have a confirmed target identification. Rodriguez, can you get a visual on the area Kim identified?" Rodriguez shifted his position carefully, using the rocky outcropping for concealment as he trained his binoculars on the distant dune. The landscape looked innocuous enough at first glance, but years of combat experience had taught him to notice subtleties that might escape untrained observers. "Sir, Kim's right. Something's definitely wrong with that dune. The sand patterns don't match natural wind formation, and there's vegetation that looks like it was placed rather than grown." Rodriguez paused, studying the area more intently. "Wait, I'm seeing what might be a muzzle flash signature. Residual heat distortion in the air about 6 inches above the dune crest." The confirmation that they had potentially located their sniper filled Morrison with grim satisfaction, but he knew that identifying a position and successfully engaging it were entirely different challenges. Al-Rashid had chosen his location with obvious care, and any attempt to assault his position would require crossing nearly 2,000 meters of open ground under direct observation. Al-Rashid was becoming aware that his concealment might be compromised. His spotters had reported unusual American activity around the observation posts, suggesting that they were conducting systematic searches rather than simply seeking cover. The sniper had faced similar situations before, and he knew that his advantage would disappear rapidly once his position was identified. Through his periscope system, al-Rashid could observe the American positions without exposing himself to their searching eyes. The team's behavior had changed noticeably since his last shot, becoming more organized and purposeful. They were no longer simply reacting to his attacks, but were beginning to develop countertactics. "The hunters search for the wolf's den," whispered one of his spotters, confirming al-Rashid's assessment that the Americans were actively seeking his position. The sniper acknowledged the transmission and began considering his extraction options. His original plan had called for eliminating the American commander and then withdrawing before they could organize an effective response. The failure of his precision shots had disrupted that timeline, leaving him in an increasingly vulnerable situation. Morrison was studying his tactical map, looking for ways to approach the suspected sniper position without exposing his team to additional casualties. The terrain offered little cover for a direct approach, but there were several wadis and ridge lines that might allow for concealed movement if used properly. "Chun, give me a link to any available surveillance assets." Drones, satellites, anything that might give us real-time intelligence on that dune, Morrison ordered. Chun worked his communications equipment with practiced efficiency, but the response from higher command was disappointing. Sir, no surveillance assets are available in our area. We're operating in an intelligence blackout zone. The news confirmed Morrison's suspicions about the mission's true nature. Someone had deliberately created conditions that would isolate his team without support, making them vulnerable to exactly the kind of attack they were experiencing. The mission was beginning to feel more like an execution than a legitimate military operation. Al-Rashid was facing his own intelligence challenges as the engagement progressed. His spotters could provide information about American movements, but they lacked the technical equipment to detect some of the more sophisticated surveillance methods that SEAL teams might employ. The sniper found himself operating partially blind for the first time in months. Kim had been studying the suspected sniper position through his high-powered scope for nearly 10 minutes, looking for any sign of movement or artificial construction that might confirm the target's location. His patience was finally rewarded when a brief glint of reflected light flashed from the dune's surface. "I've got positive identification," Kim reported with quiet satisfaction. "There's definitely optical equipment in that dune, and the positioning suggests a prepared sniper hide. Range is approximately 1,700 meters." Morrison felt a surge of tactical optimism as the pieces of the puzzle began falling into place. They had located their enemy, identified his approximate capabilities, and maintained the tactical initiative despite being under fire. Now they needed to develop a plan that would allow them to eliminate the threat without losing team members in the process. "Rodriguez, what's your assessment of our approach options?" Morrison asked. Rodriguez had been studying the terrain between their current position and the sniper's hide, looking for routes that would provide adequate concealment for an assault element. The desert landscape was notoriously difficult for tactical movement, offering little natural cover except for scattered wadis and rock formations. "Sir, there's a wadi system that runs roughly parallel to our axis of advance. It's not perfect, but it would get us within about 400 meters before we'd have to cross open ground. The problem is that final approach. We'd be completely exposed for at least 2 minutes." Morrison understood the dilemma that Rodriguez was describing. 400 meters of open ground might as well be 4,000 when crossing under observation by a skilled sniper. Even if they used smoke or other concealment measures, the risk of casualties would be extremely high. Al-Rashid was making similar calculations from his position in the dune. He had observed enough American tactical procedures to predict how they would attempt to approach his position, and he was already planning firing sequences that would maximize casualties during their assault. The Americans were skilled, but they were also predictable in their adherence to standard operating procedures. The sniper's greatest advantage remained his concealment and the long engagement ranges that favored his specialized equipment. As long as he could maintain those advantages, he could continue engaging American targets while remaining relatively safe from their return fire. The key was preventing them from closing to ranges where their superior numbers and firepower would become decisive factors. Morrison was beginning to develop a plan that relied more on deception than direct assault. If they couldn't approach the sniper's position safely, perhaps they could convince him to abandon it voluntarily. The plan would require careful coordination and a certain amount of luck, but it offered better odds than a frontal attack across open ground. "Kim, I want you to begin systematic harassment fire on that dune. Don't worry about precision. Just keep rounds impacting in the general area. Make our sniper friend uncomfortable, but don't expose yourself to return fire." Kim understood the commander's intent immediately. Sustained pressure would force the enemy sniper to remain under cover, limiting his ability to observe and engage American movements. It wouldn't eliminate the threat, but it would reduce his effectiveness while they developed more comprehensive solutions. The first of Kim's harassment rounds impacted about 50 meters from Al-Rashid's position, sending up a shower of sand and rock fragments. The sniper instinctively flattened himself against the floor of his hide, feeling the vibrations through the sand as subsequent rounds impacted closer to his location. Al-Rashid realized that his position was now under direct fire, fundamentally changing the tactical equation. He could no longer observe and engage American targets without exposing himself to increasingly accurate return fire. The Americans had successfully turned his own tactics against him, using precision fire to control his movements just as he had controlled theirs. The sniper spotters were reporting increased American activity around their perimeter, suggesting that the harassment fire was part of a larger tactical plan. Al-Rashid understood that he was facing a decision point that would determine whether he survived the engagement or joined the long list of insurgents who had underestimated American special operations capabilities. Morrison watched through his binoculars as Kim's rounds bracketed the suspected sniper position, noting how the impacts seemed to be having the desired effect. No return fire had come from the dunes since the harassment began, suggesting that their enemy was indeed being suppressed by the sustained pressure. Rodriguez, begin your approach using the Wadi system. Kim will provide covering fire, and I'll coordinate from here. If this works, we should be able to get close enough to finish this without taking casualties. The plan was simple in concept, but difficult in execution, requiring precise timing and coordination between team elements separated by hundreds of meters of hostile terrain. Morrison had led similar operations before, but never against an opponent who had demonstrated such skill and preparation. Al-Rashid was forced to make the hardest decision of his operational career. His position was compromised, his movement was restricted, and the Americans were beginning to close the tactical net around him. Every instinct told him to remain in his carefully prepared hide and fight to the end, but his training and experience suggested that discretion might be the better part of valor. The sniper began his emergency extraction procedure, a carefully rehearsed sequence that would allow him to abandon his position while maintaining some chance of survival. The procedure had been practiced dozens of times, but never under the stress of actual combat conditions. As Al-Rashid prepared to abandon his carefully constructed hide, he couldn't know that his decision to withdraw would save his life, but cost him his reputation as an invincible desert ghost. The engagement was about to enter its final and most dangerous phase. Rodriguez moved through the Wadi system with the fluid precision of a predator, his body automatically finding the best concealment while his eyes constantly scanned for threats. The narrow depression in the desert floor provided excellent cover from the sniper's position, but Rodriguez knew that other enemies might be positioned to cover his approach route. Behind him, Morrison coordinated the complex tactical dance that would either eliminate their tormentor or result in casualties that the team could ill afford. Kim's suppression fire continued to impact around the suspected sniper position, each round carefully placed to maintain pressure without revealing his exact location to possible counter-snipers. Al-Rashid was executing his emergency extraction with movements that seemed impossibly slow, but were actually precisely calculated to avoid detection. Every motion had been practiced hundreds of times until it became automatic, allowing him to withdraw from his hide without triggering the peripheral vision of observers who might be watching his position. The sniper's extraction route led through a series of interconnected tunnels that his team had spent weeks preparing. The tunnels were too small for effective pursuit and led to multiple exit points scattered across several square kilometers of desert terrain. Al-Rashid had learned from other snipers who had been cornered and killed by failing to prepare adequate escape routes. Rodriguez reached the final covered position in the Wadi system and paused to assess the open ground he would need to cross. 400 meters of sand and scattered rock stretched between his current location and the suspected sniper position. At a dead sprint, he could cover the distance in less than 2 minutes, but those would be the longest 2 minutes of his life if the sniper was still operational. Morrison's voice crackled through Rodriguez's earpiece with final coordination instructions. You'll have covering fire from Kim plus suppression rounds from our vehicle-mounted weapon. When you hear my signal, move fast and don't stop until you reach that dune. The plan required split-second timing and a considerable amount of luck. If Al-Rashid was still in position and capable of engagement, Rodriguez would be exposed to fire from one of the most skilled snipers any of them had ever encountered. If the suppression plan worked, they would finally have a chance to eliminate the threat that had pinned them down for over an hour. Al-Rashid had successfully withdrawn from his primary firing position and was moving through the tunnel system toward his predetermined extraction point. Behind him, Kim's suppression rounds continued impacting the now empty sniper hide, creating a deadly light show that masked the sound of his movement through the underground passages. The sniper's network of spotters maintained their overwatch positions, providing him with real-time intelligence about American movements. Through his earpiece, Al-Rashid learned that one of the Americans was preparing to assault his former position, exactly as he had anticipated they would. "The wolf prepares to charge the empty den," whispered his primary spotter, confirming that Rodriguez was positioning for his sprint across the open ground. Al-Rashid acknowledged the transmission and continued his careful withdrawal. His original plan had called for eliminating several Americans before extracting, but the team's competent response had forced him to modify his objectives. Sometimes survival was more important than completing every aspect of a mission. Morrison gave the signal for Rodriguez to begin his assault, and the desert erupted with covering fire from multiple American positions. Kim's precision rounds continued their steady bombardment of the target area, while the vehicle-mounted machine gun added its voice to the symphony of destruction aimed at suppressing any possible resistance. Rodriguez exploded from his concealed position like a sprinter leaving the blocks, his legs pumping as he covered the open ground with desperate speed. Every step carried him closer to either victory or death, and he focused entirely on reaching the target while trusting his teammates to keep him alive during the terrifying sprint. Al-Rashid emerged from his tunnel system nearly 300 meters from his original position, surfacing in a carefully camouflaged exit that appeared to be nothing more than natural terrain variation. His extraction had been flawlessly executed, but he knew that his reputation as an invincible desert ghost had been seriously damaged by the engagement. Through his portable scope, the sniper could observe Rodriguez's sprint toward his former position. The American was moving with impressive speed across ground that offered virtually no concealment, displaying the kind of courage that Al-Rashid had learned to respect even in his enemies. Rodriguez reached the suspected sniper position and immediately began his assault on what appeared to be a sophisticated hide built into the natural sand formation. His explosive charges were carefully placed to collapse any tunnels or fighting positions that might be concealed within the dune structure. The detonation sent sand and debris skyward in a column that could be seen for miles across the flat desert landscape. Rodriguez followed up immediately with fragmentation grenades thrown into the crater created by his demolition charges, ensuring that nothing could survive in the destroyed position. Morrison watched the assault through his binoculars, feeling a mixture of satisfaction and concern as the distant explosions marked the end of their sniper problem. Rodriguez's assault had been perfectly executed, but the lieutenant commander couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong with the tactical picture. "Rodriguez, what's your status?" Morrison called through his radio. The demolitions expert's voice came back immediately, but his tone carried notes of confusion rather than triumph. "Sir, the position is destroyed, but it was empty. This hide was definitely occupied recently, but whoever was here is gone now." The news that their sniper had successfully extracted sent a chill through Morrison's system that had nothing to do with the desert wind. A skilled enemy who could appear and disappear at will represented an ongoing threat that could resurface at any time or place of his choosing. Kim's voice joined the radio conversation from his overwatch position. "Sir, I'm observing dust signatures in multiple locations around our perimeter. It looks like there might be a tunnel system connecting various positions in this area." Morrison realized that they had been facing a far more sophisticated enemy than anyone had anticipated. The sniper position they had attacked was just one node in a larger defensive network that had probably taken weeks or months to construct. Their enemy hadn't simply found a good shooting position. He had engineered a tactical environment that gave him multiple advantages. Al-Rashid was already moving toward his secondary extraction point, following routes that had been carefully planned and rehearsed. His network of spotters would maintain surveillance on the Americans while he withdrew to a safe distance, allowing him to assess the lessons learned from this engagement. The sniper felt a mixture of professional respect and personal frustration as he considered the morning's events. The American team had responded to his attack with competence and tactical flexibility that exceeded his expectations. They had located his position, developed effective countermeasures, and forced him to withdraw without achieving his primary objectives. Morrison called his team back to their vehicles, recognizing that their current position was no longer defensible against an enemy who possessed detailed knowledge of the local terrain. The mission that had brought them to this location was clearly compromised, and continuing would only expose them to additional risks without corresponding tactical benefits. Chun had been monitoring communications traffic throughout the engagement, and his analysis revealed disturbing patterns in the intelligence that had led them to this location. "Sir, I'm seeing evidence that our mission intelligence was deliberately fabricated. Someone wanted us in this exact location at this exact time." The confirmation of Morrison's worst suspicions about the mission's legitimacy added another layer of complexity to an already dangerous situation. Not only were they facing skilled enemies in the field, but they were also dealing with potential traitors within their own intelligence network. As Alpha Team began their withdrawal from the area, Morrison reflected on the lessons learned from their encounter with the Desert Sniper. They had survived through skill, teamwork, and a considerable amount of luck, but the enemy had demonstrated capabilities that would require new tactics and preparations to counter effectively. Al-Rashid reached his final extraction point and paused to observe the American withdrawal through his portable spotting scope. The team was conducting their movement with the same professional competence they had displayed throughout the engagement, maintaining security protocols even during their retreat. The sniper felt a grudging respect for the Americans as he watched them disappear into the desert haze. They had proven themselves worthy adversaries in a tactical environment that favored his specialized skills. Future engagements with similar teams would require even more careful planning and preparation. Morrison's after-action report would eventually reach intelligence analysts who were already investigating security breaches within the American command structure. The fabricated mission intelligence that had nearly cost Alpha Team their lives was part of a larger pattern that would lead to the exposure of a sophisticated espionage network. The desert duel was over, but its consequences would ripple through both American and insurgent organizations for months to come. Al-Rashid had failed to eliminate his primary targets, but he had demonstrated tactical capabilities that would force American Special Operations Forces to develop new counter-sniper procedures. As the sun climbed higher in the Iraqi sky, the desert began to reclaim the evidence of the morning's violence. Wind-blown sand would eventually fill the crater where Rodriguez's explosives had destroyed the sniper hide, and the scattered brass from hundreds of expended rounds would disappear beneath the shifting dunes. The story of a shot that came from nowhere would become legend among both American and insurgent forces, a reminder that in modern warfare, the greatest threats often came from enemies who understood that patience and preparation could overcome superior numbers and firepower. The desert had revealed its secrets to those with the skill to read them, and both sides had learned lessons that would shape future engagements in the endless war among the dunes.